Let's look at two new rules for derivatives, the product and quotient rule. They're down at the bottom here, 6 and 7. So when we have two functions that are multiplied together, there's a special rule for that. And I use shorthand over on the right to designate first and second function. So the G function is the first one, the H one is the second one, and this can be extended to 3 functions or 4 functions that are multiplied. So the first function, the G function, stays the same in the derivative, and it gets multiplied by the derivative of the second function, in this case the derivative of H, and then we go plus, and that second function H gets written, doesn't change, and then multiplied by the derivative of the first function. And because it's multiply and add, you can write it in different ways, and you can see I wrote part of it. This is on the right I've got second times derivative of first, but I wrote derivative of first times second. So there are little things that you can do that are different, but memorize kind of a pattern and then do it the same way every single time. The next rule is for dividing, quotient, and there's a top function G and a bottom function H. And because there's a minus in the derivative, you do have to do it in a certain order. You can mix up the multiply, but that minus you've got to get in the right order. So the bottom function H times the derivative of the top function G minus the top function G times the derivative of the bottom function H, and then all over the bottom function squared. And typically for both of these, I recommend that you don't simplify after that. There are far too many mistakes that I've seen, and this is brief calculus, so we're not going to do a whole lot of simplification steps. Let's look at answers to a couple of these examples. Our first one, a product rule, and what I've done for this one is I've actually spelled out what is the first function, what is the second function. So I do get some students to think the 2 is the first function, but there is no x there. There's no variable with that 2. It is a coefficient, and the coefficient is always a part of the derivative. It always is there. So the first function, e to the x minus x, what's the derivative of that? So the special rules we learned the other day, derivative of e to the x is e to the x. What's the derivative of minus x? Well, the exponent is 1, so the coefficient is also 1. So just minus 1. It doesn't have the power rule in there. Second function, x minus natural log of x. So again, the derivative of x is just 1. Derivative of natural log of x is the special rule, 1 divided by x. And then you put it in their positions for the power rule. Big old 2 out in front, big old square bracket, so it's multiplied by everything. The first function, unchanged, times the derivative of the second function, plus the second function unchanged times the derivative of the first function. Next example, Q of S, another product. And both of these examples, you could FOIL them out, multiply everything. Sometimes that's pretty time consuming, and sometimes it's not easy. So the thing here is to learn the new rules and not try to do the old rules all the time. So first function, s squared minus 2s. Second function, 1 minus s. First function stays the same, times derivative of the second, which is just negative 1, plus the second function times the derivative of the first. If some of those basic rules from the previous video are eluding you, I'm not going into a lot of detail, review that video so you can remember, what do I do with the coefficient? What do I do with the exponent? I'm concentrating on the new rules in this video. Next one is divide, a quotient here, a negative out in front, natural log of x divided by 3 of x. So I've illuminated the bottom function, 3 of x, the top function, natural log of x. The negative is a coefficient, just out in front of everything. So the bottom function, 3 of x, times the derivative of the natural log. That's one of those special rules you just have to memorize. Minus the natural log times the derivative of the bottom function, just 3. All divided by 3x squared. Just parentheses and a square is all that you need. Next example, we've got p divided by cube root of p squared. There is an exponent rule that you can use to simplify this and not do the quotient rule. But try the new rules. So the bottom function, cube root of p squared, times the derivative of the top, plain old 1, minus the top function p, times the derivative of the bottom function, which is very similar to an example in the previous video. I did a cube root of u squared in the previous video, so remind yourself of those rules. All of that divided by the entire bottom function squared. And you could simplify that, but I don't ask you to simplify these. They're complicated enough. Last example, another polynomial here. So we could simplify this with some algebra rules, but we're not going to. So we've got w cubed here, plus 2w squared minus w, all of that divided by w squared. So the bottom function w squared times the derivative of the top function, minus the top function, nothing changed, times the derivative of that w squared, all over w squared squared, like that.